At Geneva, in the middle of frantic negotiations and clashing expectations, Sir Keir Starmer and President Trump found themselves briefly on the phone, aligned on a single solemn proposition which has been put out in the press this morning: that peace in Ukraine must be just and lasting. In an age of fractured alliances and erratic diplomacy, that convergence is striking. Yet, there is a deeper historical echo to this moment, and it takes us back more than a century to John Maynard Keynes, the economist, and his indictment of Versailles, his contemporaneous indictment of Versailles. Keynes argued that the worst peace is one that looks tidy on paper but rotten in substance, and the danger in Geneva is precisely that negotiators may secure a settlement that calms today's anxieties but shores up or stores up tomorrow's catastrophe. And the lesson is ancient and plain. An imposed peace, a Carthaginian peace, tilted too far in favour of the aggressor or too punitive towards the victim, carries within it the seeds of future conflict. Europe learned this painfully after 1919. Keynes' warning in The Economic Consequences of the Peace, a book that I'm rather proud I did a front cover for in a foreign translation. He wrote in Albanian. He wrote that the treaty aimed at the destruction of the economic life of Germany, and he predicted that such a settlement would provoke a new war within a generation. What made his warning so powerful was not foresight in a mythical sense or a mystical sense, but a grasp of psychological and economic law. Punish a society beyond endurance and you generate resentment. Humiliate it and you cultivate extremism. Strip it of agency and you incentivize radical solutions. All of this applied to Germany in 1919, and much of it can be seen in Russia's present vision of grievance and then imagined entitlement. So if Versailles taught Europe anything, it was that peace achieved at the expense of reality is a counterfeit peace. A coerced signature cannot disguise a political landscape primed for revenge. For all of Trump's theatrics and Starmer's steadiness, both men appear to understand that a fragile peace is worse than no peace at all. Trump talks of striking a deal, while Starmer stresses the need for legitimacy and security guarantees. These two instincts, often incompatible, are now threaded together out of necessity. The Geneva talks show how delicate this balance has become. The US plan, negotiated by Steve Witkoff, and the Kremlin's Kirill Dmitriev, emerged in a vacuum that excluded Kyiv and Europe, and that alone carries a faint whiff of the very error that John Maynard Keynes detested: the carving up of a future order without the consent of those whose survival depends upon it. Starmer's intervention ensured that Jonathan Powell was in the room and that British influence would not be peripheral, and that was an attempt to prevent a repeat of those mistakes. Ukraine's own position is acutely reminiscent of the tensions Keynes describes. Zelensky faces an unenviable bargain: concede territory, cap the army, and renounce the aspiration to join NATO, or risk losing the support of his most powerful ally. He said the choice was between the loss of our dignity and the risk of losing a key partner. That sentence alone could sit comfortably beside Keynes' bleak summaries of the dilemmas imposed on post-war Germany. Europe's counter-proposal, meanwhile, rejects the more extreme concession, stressing that borders cannot be changed by force and refusing to allow reparations to be inverted into investment capital for the Kremlin. In essence, Europe wants a peace that avoids the Versailles trap. Trump, by contrast, approaches negotiation like a transaction: open brutally, concede incrementally, force movement. The diplomatic machinery must somehow absorb this style without producing a distorted outcome. Here is where Keynes's central insight returns with full force. His attack on Versailles was not simply economic, it was moral and psychological. He denounced the treaty as abhorrent and detestable, not because it punished Germany, but because it punished Europe. A peace that satisfies vindictive impulses but ignores structural reality is a peace built on sand. He resigned from the negotiations because he felt he was participating in the construction of failure. His words at the time remain a sober warning to any diplomat who tries to rush history for the sake of headlines. I can do no more good here. The future life of Europe was not their concern. The danger in Geneva is less overtly punitive than Versailles, but it carries its own distortion. A settlement that rewards Russia's aggression with territorial gain, that caps Ukraine's army while granting Moscow a path back to the global economy, is not neutral. It may be dressed in diplomatic moderation, but it risks becoming a mirror image of the Versailles era. Instead of humiliating the defeated aggressor, it would embolden him. Instead of impoverishing the vanquished, it would weaken the victim. And in both cases, the result is instability. Starmer and Trump, in their different ways, recognize that a sustainable peace must not become a pressure cooker. Both men speak of avoiding a settlement that sows the seeds of the future conflict, which is, word for word, Keynes's argument in 1919. Starmer's language is steadier, Trump's is impulsive, yet the essential conclusion coincides: peace must reflect the political and strategic realities on the ground, not the illusion that the war can be ended by forcing Ukraine into premature concessions. Zelensky's tentative optimism that US proposals may now reflect the Ukrainian vision suggests that reality is finally intruding upon haste. Rubio's admission that the talks were the most productive yet is encouraging, but productivity is not the same as wisdom. The shadow of Keynes hangs over the negotiations, reminding the world that a flawed peace can be worse than an extended war. Europe remembers this, Ukraine lives it, Russia in its own way exploits it, but any sort of peace must bring Russia back into the international fold. That much is absolutely true, and that much must be preserved from Trump's original proposal. If Trump and Starmer are indeed united in desiring peace, their unity must rest on that historical truth. Not a peace that rewards invasion, not a peace that humiliates a nation fighting for survival, not a peace that treats aggression as negotiation, but a peace that holds the line between compromise and capitulation, and that refuses to build the future on the very resentments that could undo it. Keynes taught the 20th century that peace without justice is merely an interval. It's a lesson the 21st century cannot afford to relearn and cannot afford to ignore.